Sa nakaraang 2 taon ng pandemya, napakaraming nawalan ng trabaho. Hindi mabilang ng mga negosyo ang nalugi o nagsara at lumobo sa 12 trilyong piso ang utang ng bansa. Sa episode na ito, makakasama natin sina Miguel Sevidal mula sa Ateneo de Manila University at J.F. Turla mula sa University of the Philippines, Diliman. Tatalakayin natin ang mga plano at plataporma ni VP Leni, isang ekonomista para sa ekonomiya ng bansa. At kung bakit isang ekonomista gaya niya ang dapat na mamuno ng bansa sa susunod na 6 na taon.
The past 2 years have really been a predicament to so many of us. So I guess my first question is, what were the missed opportunities during the government's handling of the pandemic?
Well, let me answer that in two fronts. So the first is yung sa medical, and yung pangalawa is yung pagtugon sa ekonomiya. So sa medical front, kailangan nating aminin na medyo mabagal yung pagkilos. I don't know if you still remember at the I think March to April, I was, and I'm sure a lot of the members of our audience as well, PPEs yung pinaka inaabangan natin. Nagdo-donate tayo or naghahanap tayo ng pwedeng mabigyan ng PPE dahil nagkulang ating mga hospital. Amin natin medyo mabagal. And sa karamihan ng mga pagtugon ng gobyerno, in a lot of the responses, kulang yung medical perspective, kulang yung expert perspective. May mga experts pero yung implementation very kunwari sa lockdown, very militarized. Hindi tayo nag-contact tracing ng malawakan, di ba? Yung hospitals hindi nabigyan ng PPE kagad. Kaya our healthcare system was really strained, especially during the first ECQ and the next couple of ECQs. So that's the medical side. Yung pangalawang gusto kong i-highlight, yung pagtugon sa ekonomiya. May social amelioration, yung ayuda, pero maliit siya. 570 billion yung bayanihan 1 and 2, pero maliit lang yun eh. That's 3-4% of the gross domestic product. Kung 10% yung nawala sa atin, ano yung 3%, diba? So maliit yun. And kung titingnan mo yung actual amount, I think 20,000 yung nakuha ng mga indigent families. Pero kung 1 buwan, 2 buwan, 3 buwan ng trabaho nawala at sa tagal ng lockdown, sa tagal ng COVID pandemic, matagal bago it's going to take a while before they get back to full income. So maliit talaga yun. Yung paggastos ng gobyerno in response to the pandemic, medyo matipid. Pero kasi pag crisis, mas okay na yung humataw. Mas okay na yung sobrahan kaysa magtipid. Di ba rin ang sobra, basta wag lang kulang. So medyo maliit. May mga nagawa naman yung loans, yung create tax reform, pero iba talaga pag ginastusan mo, pag naglagay ka ng pera para sa mga nawalan ng trabaho, sa mga naapektuhan ng pandemic. So I think those two, sa medical and sa economic, ang lapses siguro or pagkukulang ng or missed opportunities ng government. Marami namang na-address, maraming feats, pero kailangan natin aminin na may mga missed opportunities talaga.
Okay, thank you for saying that. Actually, when you say na there's a lot of missed opportunities, parang for me, it's still an understatement pa nga of the hell that so many of us went through the past 2 years. And I remember I was in the branch when the country was put on lockdown. So sobrang struggle talaga. So many employees weren't able to go to their places of employment. And even dun sa ayuda, sobrang what do you call this? Sobrang masalimuot yung pagdidistribute. Like so many families who were qualified also didn't receive, and some families who were not supposed to receive actually received ayuda. So, and the ayuda was very limited, no? It was only for 2 months, I believe. So it wasn't really a sustainable way to help families cope with the pandemic. But on the flip side of that, I think during the pandemic, we really saw how our leaders acted, especially those who are running for the presidency right now, di ba? VP Leni really stepped up in terms of helping the frontliners, and really going the extra mile with the limited budget that their office has. So, what do you think, or how do you think would the Robredo presidency address the issues that you mentioned?
Yung tawag sa Office of the Vice President nung pandemic, the little office could sa liit ng budget ng OVP sa actually wala naman talagang ginagawa ang OVP except to uh, in case may emergency yung president, right? So wala naman talaga silang job, but sa dami ng nangyari from start until end and maraming resibo, yung dorm, yung shuttles for the frontliners, swab cab, vaccine express, ang dami, very comprehensive and very aligned sa medical responses. So what would a Robredo presidency look like? Base lang sa nakita natin, just looking at yung COVID response, data-driven siya. Number one, I think data-driven. Tinitingnan yung datos. I think VP Leni mentioned sa debate as early as January, tinitingnan na nila yung kinukonsulta na nila yung mga experts. Ano ba mangyayari sa strain na to? And second, I think balance yung immediate at yung long term. So makikita mo kapag may lock sa kalayaan sa COVID plan ni VP Leni, kapag may lockdown, may ayuda. Very clear yon. Versus yung response ng ating incumbent administration na medyo tipid yung ayuda. So I think that's very important. And pangatlo is yung long term, hindi lang immediate. So importante yung ayuda, importante yung suporta sa mga small businesses na kapag may crisis, pero yung more structural changes para ready tayo. Kasi I think the science community I'm not an expert of course, but it will not be the last pandemic. As the world evolves and there might be episodes of this like this in the future. So kung titingnan natin yung structural changes na gustong i-implement ni VP Leni, magiging mas handa tayo kung may pandemya ulit. Yung pagbabalik ng trust sa gobyerno, yung mga gusto niyang programa sa health sector na yung very specific, bawat baryo may nurse. Target na within 5-6 years, idodoble yung budget or yung allocation ng health. So I think it will be very promising, and I think mas makakatulog ako sa gabi kasi in case may emergency ulit, in case may crisis ulit, handa tayo, meron tayong commander-in-chief na talagang grasp yung situation and may track record to back it up.
You said it so beautifully, no? And I definitely agree with what you said. And from what I gathered with your answer and also with VP Leni's plan, parang the solution is not just for this pandemic. Kasi what you mentioned nga, di ba? There's a possibility that things like this will still happen in the future. So maganda na future-proof yung plano. And we strengthen the existing foundation of the economy para kung sakaling may mga unexpected things like this to happen, di ba? Hindi na siya nakakabigla. And also, one of the things that I would like to highlight from VP Leni's kalayaan mula sa COVID plan is the unemployment insurance. So, if, kasi so many people lost their jobs during the pandemic, and some of them, it wasn't their fault, diba? So, for those types of situations, diba, the government must provide an unemployment insurance. So, in line with the economic plans, how do you think would that help in terms of economic recovery?
I think very important in general, nakikita natin sa plataforma ni VP Leni na yung government is there. Parang salute tayo ng gobyerno. And totoo naman, kapag may crisis, dapat ang government yung sasalo. Kasi, di ba sa economics, consumption, government expenditure, investment. Kapag may crisis, kapag may pandemya, bagsak ang consumption and investment. So, kailangan yung government ang mag-step up. Ngayon, kung may crisis, dapat nandiyan yung government para sumalo. So, ayuda, unemployment insurance. Kasi yung unemployment insurance tsaka yung ayuda, nakakatulong yan. Not just the stopgap in fact, sa US, may mga studies na napapakita na yung unemployment benefits na binigay ng US government, nakatulong to sa mga para mas mabigyan ng panahon yung mga nawalan ng trabaho na makahanap ulit ng trabaho. So hindi sila magmamadali sa low paying job, makahanap sila na mas may panahon sila, mas may leeway para maghanap ng job that suits their skill set. And in general, I think ang kailangan i-emphasize talaga yung role ng government as the yung tagasalo pag may crisis. Kailangan talaga big G pag C tsaka I wala, kailangan talaga we have the G to the government spending para buhayin yung ekonomiya.
Okay, ang ganda, no? And I like that we keep emphasizing the point na the government's role, di ba, is tagasalo talaga ng mga, citizens in terms of situations like this. And just to circle back to our earlier points, di ba? VP Leni has been consistently showing that her government or would be administration will really be ready to help those who are in need. Kasi in the past 2 years, so many people have lost their trust in the government. So it's time to bring that trust back. And speaking of trust, at least 160 of the country's top economists have pledged their support for VP Leni. And VP Leni also topped Bloomberg's poll of analysts who said that she's the best presidential candidate to lead the economy out of the pandemic. So in your opinion, Sevi, what does this say about her as a candidate?
I have to make a disclaimer. So my Twitter username is Sevinomics, but I'm not actually an economist. So wala ako dun sa mga pumirma ng dun sa statement ng top economists. Pero pumirma ako sa ibang statement. But I think it shows na malaki ang tiwala ng mga ekonomista kay VP Leni. I think some of the names, some of the stars, very star-studded yung 160 na yun. Former NEDA chiefs, Stella Kimbo, na isa sa mga proponents ng economic recovery package sa House. I don't know if he was part of the list, but Joey Salceda, one of the leading members of the House that pushes for economic reforms, diba? So very star-studded, and you can see him on the track record of the people who signed this statement. Kung titingnan natin yung platform ni VP Leni, siya talaga may pinaka-kompleto na economic platform. And I think that these economists will attest to this, will agree to this. To be fair naman doon sa ibang candidates, may mga interesting proposals sila. Yung PPP gustong ibuhayin ulit or prioritize ulit versus sa infrastructure projects. Si Manny Pacquiao has the non-tax revenue proposal. Si Caliodi has the wealth tax. Pero in terms of the most comprehensive and the most complete, it's really VP Leni's platform. Both in terms of the immediate and the long term. So immediate, yung bakuna, yung ayuda, yung suporta sa mga small businesses. Pero yung long-term structural changes, I think yung nakakalimutan natin kasi na real change takes time. And nauunawaan nito ni VP Leni, kitang-kita sa platform, yung structural na long-term changes, yung ibalik yung trust sa gobyerno, yung paglalagay ng health workers sa bawat baryo at pagpapalago ng budget ng health, upscaling ng BPO, IT BPO para mas maging competitive tayo in development ng maritime industry. So, hindi lang siya para sa short term, para sa long term din. Kaya napakalaking tiwala ng mga economists kay VP Leni kasi sa plataforma pa lang sobrang swak na, sobrang may nanalo na as someone said. So, sa kalayaan sa COVID plan at hanap buhay para sa lahat, kitang-kita na may plano at kayang-kayang gawin yung plano na to.
Yes, super agree with what you said. Couldn't agree more. And we also must emphasize the fact diba, na VP Leni as an economist herself. So talagang alam niya yung mga plano na nakahain para sa Pilipinas. And also, just to digress a bit, no, 'di ba? VP Leni supporters encompass parang all sectors nga eh. So many sectors have forwarded their endorsements, not just economists, not just from the finance sector, but even educational institutions, 'di ba? Like former professors or former faculty members, even the church, even the Catholic Church is playing an active role in her campaign. Why do you think this type of support is not translating into actual survey numbers?
Well, admittedly, medyo behind yung campaign and the volunteers. If any improvement will reflect in the surveys, it's going to be in the April surveys. So may lag effect yung mga survey. Admittedly, malakas pa rin yung makinarya ng frontrunner. But I think that the good thing is that the conversion rate is still high, and with the strength of the volunteers, kitang-kita today sa house-to-house day, grand house-to-house day, na ang daming lumabas out of their comfort zones to campaign and to try to encourage conversion. Yun ang advantage. And to be fair naman to ma'am, while behind may momentum, and I hope that I think and I hope that we will see the momentum show in the April survey, if any. So by then, ma-capture na yung various rallies and yung house-to-house efforts, as well as all most of the, if not three, the two presidential debates kung saan very strong yung kanyang performance. I think all the debates she's done well. So, I think she's done the best, or she was the best performer in, I think, both debates so far. So hopefully that will reflect in the April survey. So, but I think marami pa rin talagang work na kailangan gawin. Kaya kailangan talaga kumausap, tao sa tao. But hopefully we see the improvement in the April numbers.
Yes, hopefully. Same here. And I love that you mentioned, no, that her campaign is really pushing people out of their comfort zones. Like so many people who I know wouldn't have done the same thing like 6 years ago or 10 years ago, are really going out of their homes despite the pandemic, and really nakikipag-usap tao sa tao kasi sobrang, yun talaga yung most effective eh, no? Yung house to house, going house to house, talking to people face to face, kasi nga conversion rate of VP Leni is high. So I also hope na the surveys will be able to capture that momentum this month, since we only have a little over a month before the elections. And speaking of elections, no, and speaking of current events, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is still a hot news all over the world. And even though we don't really have that strong of a tie, or we don't really have strong ties with either of these countries, how do you think will the Russia-Ukraine war affect our national economy, and how should the next president address it?
I'll give the metrics. Kung titingnan natin yung remittances na galing sa mga Eastern Europe countries na malapit sa Ukraine na maapektuhan ng crisis, it's less than 1% of the remittances. Pero in one of the debates or one of the presidential forums, VP Leni still identified that there are, I don't even remember the exact number, but she had a very specific, precise number on how many OFWs were in Ukraine. Kaya, walang iwanan, salute talaga ng gobyerno lahat. Yung mas malaking impact, and we see it today, ang mahal ng gas. Kasi Russia is one of the world's biggest exporters of oil. Kaya ngayon na-disrupt ang oil production, tumataas ang presyo. 75 pesos na yung, I don't know kung baka tumaas pa nga, pero napakataas ng presyo ng gasolina. And yung problema sa gasolina, yung Philippines ay net oil importer. Kaya pag tumataas presyo ng gasolina, other things also, the prices of other things also go up. Food especially. Kasi yung delivery, yung logistics, lahat yun tataas yung presyo. So, mahihirapan mga tao. Mas tataas ang presyo, mahihirapan, masakit sa bulsa ang nangyayari ngayon. And nararamdaman na natin. May immediate proposal si VP Leni na temporarily suspend ang excise tax kasi madalian yun very very temporary and stopgap measure siya. Kasi kung may distribution, may delay yon, and by the time na makuha ng mga tao yung ayuda or yung support, I think 200 pesos kada may figure na ni Sinay Sineda na ibibigay, pero may lag effect pa rin yun. I think yung pinaka-optimal na dapat gawin ng next president ay tingnan yung mga sector na pinaka-affected. I think VP Leni had a very had good insights on that, na hindi basta-basta yung pwedeng tanggalin yung excise tax kasi may regressive din eh. Tama naman na may advantage sa mga mas higher income yung kapag gawing malawakan. So kailangan targeted siya, and I think kailangan talaga mag-distribute ng aid. Pero hindi kailangan medyo significant siya. Maliit kasi yung na-propose ng NEDA ngayon at DOF. So first is yung temporary na pag-suspend ng excise tax. I think malaking tulong yun sa very immediate. Yung pangalawa is aid or ayuda na sapat at makakatulong talaga sa mga, lalo na sa mga sa riders, sa PUV, PUJ operators, kasi makakatulong talaga yun.
Agree. And I love how you started your answer with taking us back to that debate. I guess it was the SMNI debate na VP Leni was asked that question. Tapos I think she surprised a lot of us when she was able to give an exact figure of how many OFWs were in Ukraine, diba? So I guess that's also a testament to how committed she is to really serving Filipinos all over the world, not just in the Philippines. And I also like to stress the point na even though these countries, diba, parang kung iisipin mo, wala naman sila masyadong relationship sa bansa, yung mga nangyayaring global events, kahit pagano kalayo or kalapit sa bansa, it does affect us. And what you said nga about the gasoline prices, di ba? Yung issue kasi na yun, malapit sa sikmura ng mga tao eh. Kasi we all need to, di ba, commute or travel from one place to another. And ang presyo ng gasolina, it affects other prices as well eh. So, I'm glad that you were able to to really put the platforms of VP Leni regarding this issue. Like for example, the suspension of excise tax, which is a stopgap measure, no? But VP Leni also has other long-term plans for this. So, Sevi, in the 2022 presidential election, which is just a little over a month from now, why do you believe the best man for the job is a woman?
Well, I'm a guy, so I don't wanna. I recognize my privilege, and I'm not the right person to. But I am as an ally and as an advocate for good governance. I think that the only woman among the candidates is really the best. We see it, plataforma, track record, sabihin na natin lahat. Talagang wala na tayong masasabi. And she, totoo na para sa laylayan yung kanyang plataforma. You see it in how she goes to far-flung islands na mga botante, wala pang 3,000 pero pupuntahan pa rin niya. We've seen leaders who are women step up. The leader, Jacinta Ardern of New Zealand, among others. Angela Merkel of Germany previously, and we've seen how they've been able to steer their economies and their countries with good leadership. And I think on a more, I guess, soft note, kailangan natin aminin na inequitable pa rin. Makikita natin to sa average pay. Yung average pay ng lalaki mas mataas pa rin sa babae. And there's still societal norms that kind of block women from reaching their full potential. Pero, if Leni Robredo's president and you have a first family na including the daughters who are very competent and very admirable, Aika, Trisha, and Jill, you see a young little girls and saying, I want to be like Leni Robredo, I want to be like her daughters, and it sets a good example, it sets a good precedent, and you have role models to look up to, and I think that's something that to look forward to. We have different, we see different ways of coining it. The last man standing is a woman, abante babae, angat babae, and I think that's a very promising message for the future na, we're not, hindi babae lang, babae sila, at they can reach their full potential. They can be like Leni Robredo.
Super ganda. I think you couldn't have said it any better. And I myself couldn't have said it any better. Pero in the remaining days before the election, di ba? As we mentioned a while ago, di ba, we're already stepping out of our comfort zones. What do you expect to see pa in the campaign in terms of messaging, and what are the points of improvement that you would like to see in terms of how VP Leni connects to the sectors or the classes that medyo dehado pa siya?
I think really kailangan mas personal. I attended pakikipag-usap sa botante training, and syempre para sa atin, kasi may background tayo sa bangko, appreciated natin yung datos. Kaya pag sinasabi ni VP Leni na kailangan yung stimulus, very excited tayo at very convinced na tayo. Pero admittedly, para sa maraming households, and hindi naman to masama, realidad lang talaga. Kailangan mas personal yung kailangan, kapag jeepney driver yung boundary, kapag sa palengke yung panininda, yung access sa farm to market road. So kailangan mas personal yung hindi lang yung messaging ni VP, pero yung messaging ng volunteers. And kailangan natin i-connect yung sinasabi ni VP, yung plataforma ni VP Leni, sa mga personal na problema, sa mga personal na sitwasyon ng mga tao. Kasi 9 out of 10, I don't want to put an exact number, pero 9 out of 10 times, mako-connect natin kapag nangangamba sila sa COVID, sa bakuna para sa maliliit nila na yung mga bago lang na eligible, may solution si VP doon. Pagtakot sila na makahanap ng trabaho, meron tayong hanap buhay para sa lahat, suporta para sa unemployed. And I think na basta lang makonekta natin, and tao sa tao nga ang sinasabi ng kampanya, I think we can really make strides, and we can really convince people to vote for VP Leni. But yun lang, kailangan mas micro instead of macro. And admittedly, challenge to sa mga nerds katulad ko, pero I think that's the best way, and that's the only way. Kaya kailangan talaga tong house to house, at basta makonekta natin sa kanilang personal na nararanasan, I think we have a very good chance of swinging people to become kakampings also.
Nakaka-inspire naman. And sobrang, I don't know, sobrang ganda what you said about on connecting dun sa personal. So I also agree with you. It's also a challenge for so many of us who aren't really, extroverted, aren't really used to mingling with people outside of our comfort zones. And sobrang ganda nga na you mentioned, di ba? For example, if a jeepney driver, you would connect sa mga daily struggles nila, di ba? Kasi super hirap kasi ma-undo yung influence ng fake news. Especially in the past 6 years, sobrang it proliferated eh. So, face-to-face really is the way to go in terms of making strides with converting people to be kakampings as well. So, Sevi, I guess for the last question, no? You mentioned that you were doing, attending talks on how to convert people, ganyan. So, in the event na VP Leni, God forbid, doesn't win, do you think that these changes or this movement that is happening right now, will it still be able to maintain itself in the next few years, or ano ba, kasi sobrang bleak ng future if VP Leni doesn't win eh. So what is your forecast ba on what will happen in the next few years? Just in case VP Leni doesn't make it.
Ayoko pang isipin, baka hindi ako makatulog, but I think that admittedly it's an organic movement, yung volunteerism. We haven't seen like this. Sa Pasig, I didn't spend at all. Parking lang ang ginastos ko. Kasi sobrang dami nagbibigay ng pagkain, nagbibigay ng water, ang daming pakulo, ang daming and you saw really people. I mean, net wala naman tayong technically makuha. We're just there to show our support, but you saw talaga people, stepping out of their way to give and to give without counting the cost. So very organic at very genuine, I think, yung movement. And if anything, it will be the same people who are part of this movement who will challenge during the midterm elections. I think if anything, there's a very, if you look at the youth vote, they seem to be very supportive of VP Leni, and they recognize the need for these structural reforms. So when these people become older and they become part of the workforce, they become decision makers, there's hope kasi pwede nilang baguhin yung status quo. So hopefully in the next 3 years, it will probably be the same people who will try to stand up sa midterms, but ultimately it's a new people who are part of political life. I can't I think the network and the friends that I've made, actually less network, more friends that I've made over the campaign, as fellow volunteers. I think we'll keep in touch, find ways to be part of civic society, and try to do better for the country. Admittedly, I recognize also na hindi pwedeng walang pake. Just because okay tayo or hindi tayo affected, hindi pwedeng ambivalent tayo, hindi pwedeng passive lang. So na-inspire ako nung November, nung nag-declare si VP Leni na tumulong, and I'm just, it's honestly so overwhelming. Nakikita mo kung gaano karaming gustong tumulong at gaano karaming lumalabas out of their comfort zones. I have friends na very silent about politics, pero nakita ko sila nung rally sa QC Circle, nung rally sa Pasig, and hopefully ma-sustain yon, hopefully ma-enrich, yung pundasyon na yon, mas lalong palakasin, because I think it will form the future political life of our country.
Thank you for saying that, Sevi. No, I definitely agree. And I also take solace in the fact na parang VP Leni's candidacy and campaign has awakened so much nationalism, so much pride in us. And I also agree, no, na a lot of people who wouldn't have done the same thing like 3 or 6 years ago are really stepping up their game, really stepping out of their homes and comfort zones. And gaya nga na sinabi natin, di ba? Hindi naman natatapos to sa araw ng election lang eh, di ba? If we want change, we have to consistently do it even after the elections. And mas importante pa nga yung mangyayari after the elections, di ba? And we still have time para mangumbinsin, para lumabas sa mga comfort zones natin, para lumabas sa mga bahay natin, para makamit natin yung gusto nating kinabukasan, di ba? Na the last man standing in the 2022 elections will be a woman. And that woman is an economist also, just to connect it with this episode. And she is no other than VP Leni Robredo. So having said that, thank you so much, Sevi, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I know you're very busy, but really thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you so much, Erwin, for having it. It was a very fun discussion and lively discussion. I hope that the next time I talk to you, we can say, I don't know, should I knock on wood, President
Yes.
Maria Leonor Leni Robredo. So fingers crossed. I don't know everything. I'm going to do all the voodoo, all the egg. Mag-aalay na ako ng itlog sa simbahan. I'll do everything. And include both the voodoo and the actual house-to-house campaign. So thank you for having me, Erwin.
I think marami pa rin sa atin yung parang hindi natin na-fully grasp or we still feel somehow intimidated by economic concept. So, para ma-demonstrate lang natin, ano ba yung mga real world and tangible everyday applications of how economics affects our lives?
I think yung mainly economics is the study um, of how people make decisions. Basically, sa intro econ classes, yun mismo yung pinapresent. And that's what it is, basically. And alam naman natin, every one of us is confronted with making choices. So, meron tayong tinatawag na trade-offs, di ba? Kasi ano bang meron sa mundo? Meron siyang resources, pero itong resources na to, hindi siya unlimited. So, it entails making choices. How do you face these trade-offs na kumbaga, sige, let's give an example. Sa pag-aaral sa mga estudyante, di ba? Meron tayong subjects na may exams and we have this resource called time, di ba? And we have to allocate this time na sa ano bang kailangan nating i-prioritize. Kunyari si subject A or si subject B. And limited lang tayo natin. Meron pa tayong pahinga, meron pa tayong leisure, meron pa tayong and all those, di ba? We're confronted with those. So, ang economics kasi tinutulungan tayong tinatawag nating optimize ng choices natin kasi syempre mahalaga 'yon. Kasi kung hindi tayo mag-optimize, ibig sabihin yung pipiliin natin yung what's best, yung best case and yung best balance between how we make choices. We might be making the wrong choices in the end, di ba? So, also, pwede rin sa money management, di ba? Meron tayong budget, tapos yung budget natin, so for most of us, for all, if not all of us, meron tayong constrained tayo dun sa budget natin. We can't really spend on everything, on one thing, and don't spend on anything. Kasi di ba, there are needs and there are wants. So what we must do is to be able to know how to balance these things. Yung paano natin ma-maximize yung budget natin para sa ganon, yung the way how we want to live our lives, ma-achieve natin. So basically, yun yung things, basic econ concepts na we take for granted, no, pero very important in our lives. And also, ito yung sa mga intro econ classes, yung pag-respond sa incentives. Ito yung mga incentives is something that induces a person to act. Diba? So, mahalaga rin to, pinag-aaralan din to ng economics, and all of us are confronted with incentives, whether positive or negative, diba? And so, kunyari, presyo ng gas. So, ngayon, tumataas ang presyo ng gas dahil sa geopolitical conflicts na nakikita natin sa Europe. Magre-respond tayo dun sa pagtaas ng presyo or pagbaba ng presyo. Kung gaano karami ang bibili nating gas or gaano kakonti, di ba? Parang ganon. So, and we are faced with that whenever we buy stuff, we invest, we save, di ba? And also, gusto ko rin i-touch yung different economic issues na akala natin, dahil kasi malaki, di ba? Or parang big words, pero yun pala, it's very, nakaka-affect sa lives natin. So, for instance, inflation. So, yun yung concept na narinig natin sa balita na ito yung pagtaas ng presyo, overall price. So, akala natin na, although siguro sa mga kababayan nating nasa middle to upper income class, hindi siguro masyadong nararamdaman yun kasi meron silang savings, kaya pa nila. Pero pagdating sa mga lower middle, lower income classes nating mga kababayan, dito mas mahihirapan pag nakikita natin yung pagtaas ng presyo. Kasi paano ba pag nagtaas yung presyo, anong mangyayari? ito yung nakaka-affect siya sa kakayahan nating bumili, 'di ba? At lahat naman tayo bumibili, 'di ba? Our parents, tayo mismo, makikita natin 'yan, tapos makikita natin yung kunyari sa palengke, yung pag kunyari the next day or the next week, bakit iba na yung presyo? Tapos maghahagil kayo and all that. You have to go through that, 'di ba? And yun mas nakaka-apekto sa atin. So, yung purchasing power kung tinatawag na sa consumers, at pati na rin yung wage or yung salary na natatanggap ng mga workers sa Pilipinas, maapektuhan rin yun eh. Kunyari, yun nga, tumataas yung presyo ng oil, 'di ba? So, ang daming pinanggagamitan yan eh. Input yan eh for all for production, 'di ba? For producing intermediate goods na ginagamit sa pag-produce ng mga final goods and services. So, yun, pag naapektuhan yun, pag tumaas yung presyo, minsan yung pambili, yung nakukuha natin, magtataka ka bakit nung last year or 2 years ago, parang kaya ko pang bumili or kaya pa nung sahod ko na bumili ng ganitong group of goods and services. Ngayon parang kalahati na lang, 'di ba? At yun as in very salient, very direct yung impact ng pagtaas ng price sa buhay natin, 'di ba? Or pwede rin kunyari yung interest rates. Yun, malaking naririnig natin siguro, mas naririnig natin inflation, pero yung interest rates, minsan naririnig natin yan sa mga business news kasi pinag-usapan niya, tinatanong kung ano magre-rate hike ba ang central bank. At may epekto rin to sa mamamayan, di ba? So, ano ba yung interest rate? Ito yung rate at which people borrow or people invest in. Di ba? Kunyari kung may mortgage ka, na may pinanghuhulugan ka na bahay, di ba? Pag tumaas yung interest rates, edi mas expensive, mas costly ang magbayad ng mortgage payments, di ba? Kasi nakabase yan sa interest rates. So pati na rin yung savings or yung mga nag-i-invest sa stocks or di ba? Lahat yan nakabase dun sa interest rates na determine ng central bank. So, yan yung savings mo, dati mataas yung na-earn na interest earnings, pati na rin sa stocks and all. Pero ngayon, dahil may changes sa interest rates, pwedeng magbago, pwedeng mas mababa na yung interest income na nakukuha mo, ganyan. And lastly, siguro ang gusto ko i-tackle na economic issue that can impact consumers, firms alike, externalities. Ito yung mga unintended effects or consequences ng mga pagkonsumo o pagkonsumo ng consumers at pagproduce ng firms. So kunyari yung pollution, 'di ba? Ngayon hot topic yung biking, 'di ba? Yung gusto natin na mas eco-friendly, 'di ba? We want to reduce our carbon emissions, 'di ba? Alam naman natin na pag kunyari kaya tayo nagkokotse kasi wala tayong alternative. Wala tayong alternative transportation modes of transportation na pwede nating sakyan or minsan mahaba pila ganun. So mag-resort tayo sa paggamit natin ng car. So yun, meron yung externalities, yung pollution na i-emit nung sa usok, di ba? So merong social cost. So yun yung minsan kasi parang akala natin na okay, wala tayong costs na dinadagdag sa economy, di ba? Pero ito yung mga pag tinake into account natin tong externalities, yung mga unintended consequences ng actions natin, meron pala tong social cost sa ibang tao. Kunyari, smoking din, di ba, na akala natin na okay lang manigarilyo, pero yung pala, yung mga mas nakaka-damage pala yung second-hand smoking. Di ba? Pag kunyari may mga taong di naman nag-smoke, pero ikaw nag-smoke ka. So hindi mo na realize na okay, nakaka-harm ng ibang tao. So I guess yun yung mga basic or issues at saka yung mga everyday things that we might take for granted pero mahalaga.
Thank you, JF, for that crash course on econ. Sobrang comprehensive, and you explained very well no how economics affects us. Even if kala natin di siya nakaka-apekto sa atin, it does affect every facet of our lives. At naalala ko nga when one of our classes in Econ 100.1, parang minention ni Sir Arsenas na parang Econ, it also combines psychology in a sense.
Yeah.
Kasi parang, di ba, it somehow studies how humans make decisions when faced with limited options. Kaya, napakalaking effect din nung paano tayo mag-decide. Hindi lang yung financial concepts din eh.
Yeah.
So, having said that, siguro one of the most direct and tangible areas where economic concepts are really useful or have really been apparent ay yung nararanasan natin na pandemya.
Yeah.
And looking at our government's response to the pandemic in the past 2 years, medyo maraming pagkukulang. So, in your opinion, ano yung mga missed opportunities during the government's handling of the pandemic and the subsequent impact on our economy?
Okay. So, I guess that's a very relevant question, no? And pag-usapan natin quickly. So, siguro, generally, no, if we want to assess, yung siguro personal assessment ko on the pandemic response based on my readings, based on discussions with professors and all, yung number one missed opportunity is yung lack of urgency, yung walang sense of urgency. Siguro in a general, so ito general assessment muna. So makikita natin yun nung 2020 na kulang yung sense of urgency eh. Parang hindi nila na yung 'di ba pinatagal pa nila yung pag close ng borders, 'di ba? Nagpapasok pa sila. And hence what happened is nagkaroon tayo ng rapid increase, exponential increase in cases, 'di ba? Sabi nga ni Dr. Pernia, si former NEDA chief, yung last before si Secretary Carl, walang tinatawag na virtuous kasi when we timing matters in policy, di ba? So we did not act quickly, di ba? So I think that's a missed opportunity. So sabi nga ni Dr. Pernia, ang description niya is parang we need that sense of virtuous impatience. Ibig sabihin parang, di ba kasi impatience medyo negative, di ba? Pero in terms of policy, in terms of responding to etong mga shocks na tinatawag, yung mga pandemic, health shocks, or even yung financial crisis before that and all those other shocks, kailangan may sense of urgency because timing really do matter, especially in policy making. Kasi ang daming buhay na maapektuhan. Kung kunyari pinatagal mo pa, per day, minsan per day, it takes, may mga costs yan that citizens are confronted with, di ba? So, yun, that's number one, missed opportunity, yung walang urgency. So, sana nagkaroon ng urgency. Siguro, of course, maapektuhan rin naman tayo as time passes by, no? Pero we could have mitigated the impact, di ba, nung pandemic. Number two, ito personal assessment, and sana hindi ako i-ano dito. There's some kind of stubbornness or hubris in among our policymakers, right? It's not just the president, pero in key leaders who are essential in making decisions. Para bang kunyari yung ang dami ng evidence against hindi man against, pero ang daming evidence na saying face shields are not really effective in protecting us, 'di ba? Parang minsan pa it might cause pa harm, 'di ba? Pero hindi pinakinggan, parang walang sense of listening, sense of hearing from those na even experts na nagsasabi, may research, 'di ba? Na lumalabas, 'di ba? Parang ayaw nilang makipag-engage with experts. Parang how I see it is yung sa tingin nila parang yun sila lang yung may alam, sila lang yung may monopoly of knowledge and information. Pero um yun, stubbornness, hubris, causing yung frictions to collaborate with the government. And I believe na that's a missed opportunity yung dahil sa hubris dahil sa stubbornness, 'di ba? Yung parang ayaw mo na makipag-work hand in hand with the government, 'di ba? I think collaboration is key as well uh, when it comes to these threats or these pandemic or these big economic issues, no, na pwede namang ma-mitigate pero hindi na-mitigate kasi hindi nagtulungan or ayaw pakinggan, di ba? So I guess those are the general things na missed opportunity. So one is yung walang urgency, di ba? And number two, yung stubbornness. Yun nga. So specifics, so yun nga, alam naman natin na merong inadequacies in testing, tracing, and treatment. 'Di ba? Hindi inaksyonan agad. Parang kung titingnan mo kahit hanggang ngayon, i-assess mo yung testing, tracing, treatment. Anong saysay nung ang tawag dito yung health tracker, 'di ba? I mean, I'm not sure how well it reaches yung mga close contacts, 'di ba? Hindi siya ano ba? Hindi na optimize yung paggamit nun. So, 'di ba? Nag-develop nga yung DICT pero what happened? Tas hindi pa centralized. 'Di ba? Yung testing, tracing, and treatment natin. Which would be helpful, 'di ba? So parang kunyari, may central database ka, mas mabilis mong makita sino yung close contacts, tas sa ang hospitals ang pwedeng mag-accommodate sa mga COVID patients and all. Mass testing wasn't conducted. A lot of people are clamoring for mass testing. Tas sinasabi nila, hindi naman mass testing, targeting testing. We call it that way, call it a different way, pero that's still the same way, pero hindi pa rin nagawa. So yung testing is very small, 'di ba? So parang hindi na-detect agad yung kunyari kung may spread ulit. We don't know if there's a spike. Ngayon, election season, 'di ba? Ang dami nang lumalabas. We don't know if accurate pa ba yung COVID cases, 'di ba? So yun, even until now, mass testing is I'm not seeing that occurring, 'di ba? Also, missed opportunity testing should have been subsidized, if not free, 'di ba? Paano ba 'yun? Kasi ngayon ang mahal ng testing, 'di ba? Kaya maraming tao rin na hindi na rin magpapatest. Yun nga yung sinasabi ko, incentives, 'di ba? If you want to incentivize people, want to encourage people to test, we make it less costly. Pero they didn't. I mean, the cost of testing, napakamahal pa rin, shouldered pa rin ng private sector, shouldered pa rin ng private individuals. And yun, malaking gastos na rin yun. Tapos, i-require pa every 2 weeks, although sa government, I heard na some government agencies, meron daw silang weekly or parang ganun na free testing. Pero how about the rest, 'di ba? So malaking bagay 'yon pag ang testing ay na-subsidize para mas mapababa. Kung hindi man free, 'di ba? I mean kasi syempre may cost pa rin 'yan. Kahit man lang subsidize para make it very minimal lang. Kunyari 5 or 100, 200 or magpadala sila ng kits, 'di ba? 'Yon, another missed opportunity. Or yung yung pinakita ng OVP, sana scale up, yung bibigyan nila ng incentive for people to stay at home, yung kunyari yung mga necessities, yung mga basic goods and services, medicine, ganun. Kung na-divert lang yung funds sa ganung aspect, it really would be helpful to many Filipinos. Other missed opportunities, transportation. Hindi siya napaganda. Nakita natin na marami pa ring, mahaba pa rin ang pila, 'di ba? Gusto nga nating mabawasan yung spacing, yung distancing ng mga tao sa public mass transportation. Gusto nating ma-implement, pero look at the lines. We see the lines, mga commuters. They make it hard for people to ride a bus, 'di ba? Or at least yung MRT now, it was rehabilitated, pero it should have been done earlier, di ba? So, yun, poor transportation policies na, yun nga, nung the height of pandemic, ang hirap sumakay. Ang daming, tapos nagpapapasok na yung ibang companies or yung even the government agencies themselves, nagpapapasok na, pero they're not providing means of mobility. And mobility is important if we really want to, recover from the pandemic. Ano pa? And meager MSME support. Ibig sabihin, napakakonti ng, although pinababa ng central bank yung interest rate, so may capabilities na manghiram, mas madaling makahiram dahil mas mura. Pero kung titingnan mo, konti lang din yung nanghihiram. Diba? Not all businesses are borrowing kasi, diba? Why would they borrow? What's the reason? So, meron ding mismatch din diba? So, ang mas maganda sana is yung nabigyan ng subsidies sa mga micro, small, and medium enterprises, kasi bulk of the enterprises here in the Philippines consist of MSMEs. And sila yung malaki yung share in employment. Diba? So, sana man lang continuous, tapos very, yung talaga, yung malaki na support sa maliliit na businesses para hindi sila magsasara. Kasi yung di ba, kaya maraming small businesses na nag-close down kasi walang kumain, nasa bahay lang lahat. So, I guess, yun nga, when we talk about platforms na for the next administration, I guess that's we can talk about more yung MSME sector, diba? And lastly, siguro there's still lack of investment in public health infrastructure. Yun yung kulang na kulang. Hindi pa rin napataas yung salary, wage ng mga healthcare workers. Nagbigay sila ng yung risk allowance, pero was it enough? I don't think so. Kaya nga makikita natin ang daming doctors, ang daming healthcare workers, nurses, medical technologists, and all those frontliners in the hospital clamoring for a raise in salary, but they have not done it, diba? So that's one missed opportunity to invest in our healthcare workers. Number two, yung healthcare is not accessible still, especially yung recent scandal na yung PhilHealth, diba? Yun na nga yung magbibigay tulong sa mga mahihirap nating kababayan, kasi yung insurance yun diba? They pay for yung gastusin sa hospital, pero what happened, ginamit sa ibang bagay. So that in itself is another investment that should be addressed in the next administration, yung healthcare, making it accessible for many people. And then lastly, facilities, no? So konti pa rin yung state hospitals na kaya mag-accommodate for our low-income households. Yung capacity dapat i-increase. Alam naman natin, we have good doctors, we have good nurses, we have really great talent in the hospital, in the medical sector, pero facilities have not been built, or they still lack. Kaya parang minsan nag-worry yung, 'di ba, yung ina-assess din yung healthcare capacity pag may surge, 'di ba? Kung kaya ba ng hospitals mag-accommodate. I guess kailangan pang pagtuunan ng pansin yung pag-build ng healthcare facilities. And I think lastly, education, kasi yun yung mga mahalagang key sectors, no, sa if we want if we really want to develop our country. So when it comes to education, a missed opportunity is yung yun din, lack of urgency sa pagbukas ng schools. Although of course we understand the sentiment of parents letting students go to face to face, pero we see yung scarring effects ng online learning, di ba? Makikita natin, even kunyari may mga relatives tayo na may mga anak, makikita natin yung struggle nila na they're trying to balance their time to focus on their children and focus on their work, di ba? So, yon, I think there's a missed opportunity in opening the schools. Kasi, ano ba, kaya pa rin eh. Kasi tingnan mo, restaurants have been open, malls have been open. All these have been open, but schools still limited. So, merong, may doon, parang disjunct. Ano ba yung goals natin? What do we want, di ba? So, businesses have been opened, di ba? Nilobby ng mga small businesses. Pero schools are not open. And the way to open schools is yun nga, I think investment din in facilities, investment in minimal health protocol facilities na malagay sa mga schools. Kasi yun, if we see in other countries, meron kaya pero they did not do it for I don't know what reason. So, ayun. So, I guess there are a lot of missed opportunities, diba? And all these have impact in our future trajectory. Kasi kunyari, yun nga, ang pinoint out ko yung health, education, right? Even MSMEs, they all have impact on our growth and development. So, pag hindi siya inaksyonan, mapapag-iiwanan yung bansa natin. Look, kunyari yung international assessment on education, di ba? Yung napakababa nung reading level, math level ng mga grade schoolers, which is so saddening, di ba? So, ayun, there are a lot and really it impacts our future trajectory na saan ba tayo patungo? Ano bang gusto nating kinabukasan? A lot of those policy or missed opportunities affect those heavily.
Okay. Thank you, JF, for that very comprehensive explanation. And parang hearing you explain those things, parang it took me back to 2020 and the past 2 years na sobrang, I have no words for the frustration, for the anger. Talagang, for the past 2 years, parang everyday mas nakikita mo talaga yung pagkukulang sa sistema in a lot of ways. Hindi lang sa transportation, healthcare, education, and the things that you've mentioned, di ba? So, mas lumitaw talaga kung ano ba yung mga kailangan natin pagtuunan ng pansin. Especially since it's election season. At I guess it's also one of the factors kung bakit I've made the decision to really support VP Leni kasi mas lumitaw during the pandemic yung efforts niya to contribute despite her limited budget. And recently, at least 160 of the country's top economists have pledged their support for VP Leni. And she also topped Bloomberg's poll of analysts and investors who said that she's the best presidential candidate to lead the economy out of the pandemic. So bilang isang ekonomista, JF, from one economist to another economist who is running for president, ano sa tingin mo yung sinasabi nito about VP Leni's credentials and abilities to lead our country?
I think it's very interesting, no? I think these investors, analysts, they represent private sector. And of course, our economists, meron mga private sector economists, meron ding academe. And the fact na nag-state sila ng support for the vice president to become the next president means a lot of things. So I guess siguro for the sake of the listeners, siguro para lang aware sila what the Bloomberg poll is about. So siguro briefly ko lang i-share what it is. So, 28 investors and analysts were asked whom they think is the best person to lead the Philippines to oversee an economic rebound. And yun nga, Vice President Leni Robredo garnered the highest score, followed by Senator Lacson, then Manila Mayor, then former Senator Marcos Jr., and then Senator Manny Pacquiao. So, yun, they were rated and they believe that Robredo presidency is the best person to lead the Philippines. So, I think just I want to highlight yung mga, I think kasi in interview So, this is from the Bloomberg article. Yun nga, isang lender, large market strategist pala, chief market strategist ng BDO, sabi niya, what we need is a captain who will bring us out of the storm. So that leader must be able to address the economic and social crises, put back on the path to faster growth. So yun nga, and then yung mga biggest priorities according to the poll results ng Bloomberg, managing the pandemic and cooling the inflation are the biggest priorities for the next administration. So yun nga, siguro briefly lang bakit inflation, no, ang isa sa mga biggest priorities. Kasi ngayon, hindi lang naman dahil sa Ukraine-Russia conflict bakit tumataas yung presyo. Dahil na rin nagbubukas na yung economy. So, merong tendency for prices to rise kasi mas dumadami na ulit yung bibili, mas marami na ulit yung nagbubukas na firms to sell and produce. So yan, kaya inflation is top priority na sinasabi ng mga analysts and investors. So ito isa pang economist at the Capital Economics. If Marcos is elected, it would only reinforce our view that the economy will continue to underperform over the coming years. So ito, very striking tong comment na to kasi it just made me realize na yung yung private sector and the international community at large, parang wala silang collective amnesia. They remember what the Marcoses did during during that 21 years of governance in the Philippines. So, if they are able to realize that, bakit yung mga karaniwang tao, syempre marami ng factors yan, education all, pero yun nga, di ba, striking na itong mga analysts, they still know what happened during those years. So, ayan, so sabi nung isang economist sa Nomura Holdings, Marcos, in our view, will likely be regarded as less market-friendly than Robredo. Right? So, yun nga, ibig sabihin kasi alam talaga nila yung what a Marcos presidency would be. Diba? If he is elected. So yun. So yun yung sa private sector. Ngayon, punta tayo sa statement ng top economists. So ito yung nandun sa statement nila sa online supporting the candidacy of Vice President Leni Robredo. So they believe that only a competent leadership can restore people's trust and confidence in government, right? So they also believe that the recovery, economic and social recovery, merits priority for the next administration. And that they understand that the problems that we're faced with cannot be fixed by quick fixes. They will not be solved by quick fixes. And yun nga, what's important, sabi nila, is yung addressing yung deep roots, diba? And the pressing problems like lack of gainful employment, inflation, food shortages, inadequate public health system, infrastructure deficit, cronyism, and corruption, among others. They believe that the country urgently needs a better pandemic response that is sound, prompt, informed by science, and evidence-based. So naniniwala sila na VP Leni can do all this, di ba? Na she brings to the table solid economics and legal background, which is necessary for policy making. Yun nga, Second, Robredo has genuine concern for the plight of the poor and marginalized. So alam naman natin na naging attorney siya sa PAO and nakatrabaho niya yung mga sumilaw farmers and all those other marginalized groups. And then third, track record, hands-on leadership and good governance. And then I think what I want to talk about now uh, yung view ko on what these statements mean for the candidacy of Vice President Leni Robredo. Sabi ng Economist, bad governance is a poison that kills both lives and livelihoods. Right? So, dun tayo sa private sector muna, no. Yun nga, sabi ko, collaboration is key in doing doing public good work. If we want, kasi syempre government has limited resources as well, limited information, and the private sector can contribute to that, to those deficits na meron ang government. So, working hand in hand with the government, private sector, working hand in hand with the government is key to development, no? And it's the private sector saying that they have their trust. They put their trust on Vice President Leni Robredo, on the kind of administration that she will deliver when she is elected, diba? I think, ano ba? Yun nga, yung trust. I want to highlight that factor, very important. Kasi kung walang trust ang private sector, it's really hard to achieve anything. Kasi yun nga, ang daming kakulangan din ng government. Although they can do a lot, diba? Pero they can only do so much. So, yun nga, napatunayan natin yan sa pandemic response ni Vice President Leni Robredo. Na-optimize niya yung collaboration with the private sector to help her with the initiatives of the Office of the Vice President, yung mga programs and development initiatives niya noon bago yung pandemic, like yung housing and yung rehabilitation sa Marawi, diba? And she's leveraged on that. Kasi nga alam naman natin yung budget ng Vice President, ng Office ng Vice President, very small, and it can only go so much, diba? So yun nga, what I've said is yung securing the participation of the private sector in working hand in hand with the government is integral to advancing development. So we know that the private sector has meron siyang pwedeng ma-fill in eh. Like kunyari, government can learn from the private sector in terms of research and development, knowledge and skills transfer, infrastructure investment, yun nga yung public-private partnership, di ba? All these, yung mga kayang matutunan ng government from the private sector can further development, enable, productivity gains, quality jobs pwedeng ma-generate, and of course, technological advancement. On the other hand, what the economists are trying to say is institutions matter. Of course, we know na from the time that we've toppled the dictatorship ng 1986, 1985, malayo na rin narating ng Pilipinas in terms of economic prospect. Yun nga, tinawag na tayo na tiger, Asia's tiger economy, di ba? Yung growth rates ay very perspective, very attractive sa investment. But then we saw as well yung repercussions ng weak institutions. Ibig sabihin, ito yung enabling environment for the economy to grow. Kung ito yung kunyari mga agencies, ito yung mga regulations, laws, how strong or how disciplined is the government in implementing laws, regulations, yun nakita natin yung weak institutions and how it affected our economy. So we know na policies, right, which develop political, legal, and administrative institutions are good for development in general and poverty reduction in particular. However, yun nga, pag ito mired by corruption cronyism. Ngayon, nag-rise ulit yung cronyism during the time of the Duterte administration. Nakita natin na may mga nakinabang na players sa pamamahala niya. And we saw how evident, paano naapektuhan yung kunyari telco system natin, mabagal pa rin yung internet, and internet or in ICT facilities are very important in advancing technology and giving access to yung mga people for 'di ba, important yun eh. So I think yung sinasabi ng mga economists, they believe that it is only under our Robredo leadership that institutions can be strengthened and reforms in our political systems be made. So I actually watched an interview. Sabi nga nung isang political economist from Ateneo, sabi niya, yun nga, while the markets or yung economy natin na liberalized na since the time of Marcos, yung politics hindi pa rin liberalized. When I say liberalized, ito yung more competition, 'di ba? So sa politics side of things, marami pa ring dynasties, marami pa ring families, names na are just there and are not being replaced by other people. And that's important kasi kunyari if they stay there, if dynasties stay there, medyo makikita mo na may complacency in how they govern, in how they spend in infrastructure, tapos minsan nabubulsa, 'di ba? So hindi na ma-maximize yung budget for local development. Kaya mahalaga yung platform ni Vice President kasi 'di ba sa gobyernong tapat angat buhay lahat. So that's what she's emphasizing eh. Restoring trust in the government, number one. So yun yung sabi ko about the private sector. Number two, yung institutions, making the enabling environment work. Kasi kung hindi, we're back on a cycle of poverty, of conflict na never ending. So yun yung gustong i-highlight ng private sector and the economists na under a Robredo leadership, she can push the economy out of the pandemic and put back the economy to growth and development trajectory.
Thank you, Jeff, for saying all that stuff. So, super agree with everything you said. And if it's one thing, no, talaga na-highlight talaga what VP Leni can do for the economy once she becomes the president. And it's significant coming from investors themselves, economists themselves, from people from the private sector. And like what you said nga, we have to strengthen the institutions and the enabling environment for these changes to take effect. And sana nga mag-translate itong ganda tong tiwala kay VP Leni. Hindi lang sa private sector pati na rin sa mga nasa laylayan at karamihan ng mga boboto. And sobrang nakakalungkot nga na you said na naalala nila yung nangyari nung dictatorship, di ba? What it did to our economy. And sana mag-translate din yon sa national memory natin. So, in the future, di ba, we can prevent another Marcos from taking the spotlight again in our national politics. And having said that, the next president will have a tall order in terms of managing the economy and dealing with a lot of geopolitical issues. And the most pressing of which is the Russia-Ukraine war. So, we don't really have that strong of a connection between the two countries. Pero in your opinion, how will the Russia-Ukraine war affect our national economy and how should the next president address it?
Okay. So I guess mainly kaya tayo affected because we are a net importing country. We don't have our own oil. So we import oil from other countries. Pero yun nga, hindi pa rin malaki yung impact kasi we import oil from China, South Korea, and Japan. Pero Japan gets crude from Russia. So I think that's the only connection we have from this conflict. Pero in any case, nakita natin yung pagtaas ng fuel prices. So, nakita na natin in recent weeks na pumipila sila sa mga gas stations to fill up their cars para hindi nila magbayad ng mas mataas na price, right? And we know for a fact na crude oil very important in a lot of things, in a lot of, input to production. So kaya makikita natin na hindi lang siya sa transportation sector yung pagtaas ng price eh. Makikita natin siya in broad sectors kasi ginagamit siya ng mga companies, 'di ba, to transport goods and services. 'Di ba, kailangan ng gas ng mga transportation mechanisms ng firms. So that's one. Number two, I think the direct impact siguro for our country is, I think we should watch out for China, right? Because China is an ally to Russia. And as far as I recall, China has not condemned the act of Russia. So now, what does this mean for us? If Russia can do it, China will definitely do it, di ba? Especially na China has interest in our territory, particularly in the West Philippine Sea. Kasi ano bang meron sa West Philippine Sea? Of course, number one, syempre strategic siya for military base. But second, may oil, may rin dyan, resources that can be extracted from. So we have to watch out for China, right? Kasi how the Russia-Ukraine conflict plays out, ganun ang pwedeng mangyari sa atin, lalo na may interest ng China. So, what we can do, number one, dun muna tayo sa China para kasi domestic na yung iba eh. So, number one, what the Philippines can do is to strengthen mutual and strategic relationship with the ASEAN. Medyo, yun nga, less teeth pa yung ASEAN eh, in terms of yung pag-assert ng territorial sovereignty. Although yung kaya rin less teeth kasi makikita mo na may interest dito mga neighboring countries natin, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So, pero I think that's the best way we can do besides asserting our tribunal win, 'di ba? Sa West Philippine Sea. West Philippine Sea. So, I guess two of those things. So, syempre, assert yung tribunal. Number two, yung mutual relationships with ASEAN. Kailangan ma-build yon. And one foreign or economic policy that the next president should address, should pursue is this, yung building or making sure na buddies tayo with our neighboring ASEAN countries. Kasi, of course, alone, we can't face these big countries like China. But as a group, as a regional bloc, I think we have a fighting chance, di ba? It's not war. I'm not talking about war, but I'm talking about yung assertion lang. Hindi mo naman, I mean, di ba? Yun yung sinasabi nila, hindi ka naman makikipag-war when you assert your territorial and economic rights eh. Ang gagawin mo lang is mag-build, stand your ground as a country, as a regional bloc, 'di ba, against this threat para hindi tayo mabully. Yun. So, yun, economic and foreign policy na yun. Pero I'm not so keen on foreign policy. Pero economic-wise, it also affects. So, and then number two, in terms of domestic, no, kasi what the government did to respond to the rise in the prices is to implement fuel subsidies and cash aid, but it's very small. So ano ba yung recommendations na inapprove ni President Duterte? Meron pa ring excise tax, fuel excise tax. And then number two, yung 200 per month cash aid, di ba? To the bottom 50% of the Filipino households, or roughly 12 million individuals. 200 pesos. So, pati nga yung ibang economists, analysts, nagtaka sila, Kaya ba yon sapat? Hindi. Malamang hindi siya sapat, 200 peso per month. So, I guess the next president should, yun nga, yung propose kasi nung si Representative Stella Kimbo, who is also an economist, ang sabi niya is to suspend taxes imposed on selected petroleum products. Hindi naman siya totally on all types of oil products ay isuspend eh. Kasi yun yung worry daw ng Department of Finance. Paano yung collection of tax kaya ayaw nilang mag-suspend. Pero what Representative Kimbo proposed is on selected, yung mga petroleum products na mas gamit ng mga low-income households. Diba? Gasoline, I think, hindi siya nag-propose ng suspension sa gasoline tax. Pero yung mga petroleum products that affects low-income households. And also, of course, targeted subsidies are still helpful. And dapat taasan talaga yung subsidy, not just 200 peso per month. Dapat yung that amount that can restore yung kung saan yung household na yon before the impact of the rise in oil prices. Diba? So, I guess that's the short term, diba? It's a big relief, sabi nga ni Rep. Kimbo, na kung gagawin natin yon yung suspension of excise tax, kasi direct yun eh, directly. Yun yung kasi usually kinoconsume ng mga low-income households. So, at least, mas ano na sila, mas okay na sila doon. Diba? And it's progressive, sabi nga niya. But, siguro medium to long term kasi ang impact ng Russia-Ukraine war is mostly on diba? On oil and yung mga bilihin. I think what we can do medium to long term is explore alternative sources of energy. So mga renewable energy facilities, diba? I think that's important in in lowering our dependence on oil of other countries. And of course, explore din natin yung West Philippine Sea. Kaya nga, one way to assert our territorial rights is to explore. Explore na yung West Philippine Sea. And as well as meron tayong Benham Rice. May resources din dyan as far as I recall. So, pero yun din, parang gusto rin kunin ng China. So, what we can do is, yun nga, and I think it's starting, at least in Benham Rice and some parts in West Philippine Sea, in some islands. So, meron ng initiatives na for exploration of resources. So, I guess yun yung medium to long term. And then, of course, invest in research and development for alternative sources of energy. And what we want is, sa long term, is to transition to carbon neutral economy. So, ibig sabihin, more on electric powered rather than oil dependent mechanisms. So yun. So I guess the next president should do all those yung short term. And as far as I know, yun yung platform, yun yung plans ni Vice President Leni Robredo. So I guess she's the only one who has that foresight. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, JF, for saying that. At I do agree nga na, kumbaga, in terms of platforms, talagang si VP Leni may pinaka-comprehensive in terms of addressing these issues. Naalala ko nga nung debate, actually hindi siya debate, parang interview niya with DZRH, parang tinanong siya what would she do once nag-escalate na yung war in Russia and Ukraine. Tapos sinabi niya na uunahin niya ay siguraduhin na ligtas yung OFW sa Ukraine. And she even gave a specific number ng OFW sa Ukraine. So napaka-impressive na even the tiniest details, she's well aware of it. At one thing I also picked up from what you said ay kailangan natin ng leader na naninindigan sa teritoryo natin against China. And it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean na may kipaggera tayo. It's not a false dichotomy, di ba?
Yeah.
But we have to assert our right. At si VP Leni yung kandidato na talagang ina-assert yung karapatan natin sa teritoryo natin. And it also brings into the question na kailangan natin ng leader na pinagkakatiwalaan ng international community. Hindi tayo pwede magkaroon ng leader na galing sa pamilyang may record na ng papahirap sa ating bansa. So, having said that, JF, I know you're also a kakamping. And I guess I just yes. Nakita ko rin your stories na you were in Pasig during the Pasig Laban. Also, I guess for our last question, no, in the 2022 presidential elections, why is the best man for the job a woman?
Well, because that woman is a lawyer economist, and not just a lawyer economist, but a very credible at being one. You know, I guess that's basically it. Makikita natin sa track record niya, sa work ethic niya, and her on the ground experience. So, having all those, diba, yung sabi nga nila parang she was able to navigate from the judiciary kasi nag-lawyer siya, legislation because she became a representative, diba, from Kamsur. And then now vice presidency is an executive job. Na navigate niya yung lahat, and having said that, she can manage the economy well. And we've seen her in the pandemic response, how she managed to do initiatives with limited budget, with resources, very low resources. She was able to help a lot of people. And siguro what pushed her to do that, it's because of her compassion. And that's a factor, a big factor as well, personally for me, for voting a president, is yung compassion towards other people. And because she's worked with the marginalized groups, 'di ba? As in napakalapit niya sa tao. Hindi ka magtataka na hindi ka tatakbuhan eh. Hindi ka tatakbuhan, hindi ka nanakawan, hindi ka iiwan sa ere, 'di ba? As a president. So also yung pagiging itong dual background niya. I just want to point out that dual background. Although of course in the past we've had economists, we've had lawyers, pero yun nga, she's very credible at her job. And having this dual background with a clean track record provides her with tools in understanding how to strengthen institutions. As I've mentioned, economists really pound on the focus of institutions, improve regulations. Syempre, alam naman natin, kailangan pa rin i-regulate yung mga markets na kailangan i-regulate. And then implement sharp and clear policies. Especially, we need clear and sharp policies because just like kung makikita natin sa pandemic, kung hindi siya clear, kung kunyari puro paligoy-ligoy or we're dragging on, pag ganun yung kind of policy work, nagkakaroon ng uncertainty. I mean, in the overall level. So, yun, may impact din yun sa economy. So, she can do that. She can implement sharp and clear policies that will surely help various sectors, 'di ba? Not just one sector. Hindi siya yung hindi siya trabo eh. Kung titingnan nyo, she doesn't come from a political dynasty. So, that's what's good about her. Wala siyang kikilingan na family or wala siyang, you know, ang nagbaback talaga sa kanya is the people. So, and with all this, we can achieve growth trajectory. We can go back to our growth trajectory and we can achieve development outcomes. So, ayun, again, gobyernong tapat, angat buhay lahat. That's a very strong statement of focusing on building our institutions, building our, our enabling environment, as I've mentioned, so that businesses can flourish, not just the big ones, but the small ones, the MSMEs, and also our people, our kababayan will be protected, and hindi sila mabubuli ng mga, ng big politicians and so on and so forth. And actually maganda nga yung parang one of her, yung pag naging president siya, one of her first few days, gusto niyang enable or implement yung full disclosure, which is very important for transparency reasons kasi alam natin kung saan napupunta yung tax, 'di ba? And actually, kung I forgot to mention, no, so kung ganito yung pagka-clean ng track record niya, makikita mo na pati wala tayong magiging problema sa tax collection because everyone would pay accordingly. 'Di ba? Kung ano man yung tax na impose sa'yo, madaling mag-collect, mas malinis, alam natin kung saan napupunta yung tax natin sa mga important, very key priority sectors. 'Di ba? So, I guess for me, that's why the best man for a job is a woman.